Mom!
I really want to thank you guys for coming. Marie Banfield, I met her a few years ago through my ventures, and she is one of the most consistent people I have ever met in my life. And consistency is very important when you're talking about things that people do not want to hear. And Marie Banfield does that quite a lot, and she does it well, and she does it thorough. And I am so glad that she is here in our community to be able to do this. So I want to welcome you, Marie Banfield.
Thank you, Regina. Appreciate it. So I think it's probably good to start off a conversation or a presentation so you know a little bit about me. I think it helps people to know where I'm coming from and what I do. So let me start by just telling you a little bit about my background. So I'm a mom, and I've got 3 kids, 20 in their 20s right now. And probably about 20 years ago, I started researching education, mainly for my own selfish purposes. I wanted to make sure that my kids got the best education. And so that's what I started doing. And I don't know if you remember 20 years ago, the internet really wasn't around, or it was just beginning. And I started connecting with people around the country and sometimes outside the country. And what I found was that people involved in education reform, or people who say, you know, I'm for public education, I'm for education, I found that there's 2 groups. There's one that want to just funnel money to the public schools, funnel. And then there's other people that were really concerned about the content. Are kids getting a good education?
Yes.
And so I decided this is the camp I wanted to be in. Not that funding isn't important, please don't misunderstand me. But I knew, I'd seen homeschoolers, I was connecting with homeschoolers, and I knew it can be done with almost nothing. Homeschoolers do an amazing job teaching their kids, because for some strange reason they can pick out academic content really well. And they do it well, and there's studies and there's evidence to show that. So, as I said, I connected with people around the country. And my focus now is on academic excellence and parental rights, and that's my main focus. I lobby in Concord. I talk to legislators all the time. I advise legislators. I advise candidates. I will talk to school board members. I will talk to the NEA. I have collaborated with the ACLU on legislation. I don't care what your political background is. I don't care where you come from. If this is your focus, I will work with you, and we will figure something out to help public education become even better. If that's possible, if it's possible. So I do lobby a lot of times on legislation. There's a lot of laws that have passed in New Hampshire that I have contributed on in terms of testimony. There's some that haven't. I've helped kill bills that might not be good for public education, or parochial private school homeschoolers, because I will delve into that too. So I do want to introduce one gentleman who's here, Michael Gendry. And he's somebody who I am now working with in New Hampshire. And I'm just going to read really quick just his background. Because again, as I said, I work with people around the country. And so Michael is the president of NHPI. Our state chapter is USPI, which is U.S. Parents Involved in Education. So he's going to head up the New Hampshire chapter. The purpose of USPI is to return education decisions from Washington to the state and school districts. Michael is a college professor of philosophy and ethics with a strong academic credentials. He was recommended to lead MAPI by Dr. Sandra Stotsky. And if any of you know who Dr. Sandra Stotsky is, she was the English professor who rejected the Common Core standards when they were brought forward. She is a former superintendent or commissioner of education down in Massachusetts. He understands the ideological underpinnings of ideological innovation in education, most of which is agenda-based and teaches no valuable content. The overreach of critical race theory is stunning and can be stopped if parents are willing to demand accountability in spending taxpayers' money. He's asking you to join him in organizing the proper action here in Hampton. We need to put pressure to stop virtue signaling and instead show the district that they need to teach content, facts, and values of opportunity to unify diverse student body. So Mike ended up in Northampton, where I ended up. How funny is that? So please, come or talk to him after this is over. He is another great resource. So I came here to talk about critical race theory. One of my focuses for the last 10 years has been on Common Core. If you ask any legislator, the commissioner, the governor, probably anybody in the state who's fighting Common Core in the state, they're going to point to me, because I am probably the leading voice, along with some great other people. And you. And other people who have worked really hard to fight dumbed down academic standards and try to make improvements. But I'm not here to really speak about that tonight, although afterwards I'm more than happy to discuss anything education related once I get through this. So that's why I'm involved with critical race theory and researching it, because this is something that is coming into the public schools. So let me just start by going through this, and then at the end, if there is any questions or if you want to have a discussion, I'm open to that. So critical race theories began in the 1970s as various legal scholars, including Derek Bell, a black civil rights lawyer who taught at Harvard Law School, began to examine how the law and legal system serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful at the expense of others. Key tenets of the theory mostly agreed upon by proponents are that racism is a common experience faced by people of color in the United States, that is institutional in the U.S., and that it benefits whites. The theory examines systemic racism as part of an American life and institutions and how it can give white people an advantage. Some common complaints are that it pushes a left-wing ideology that will plant seeds of self-hatred in white children based on the belief that white people are born racist, oppressors, and black people are born as our victims. Some parents have noted that critical race theory puts a focus on race and actually leads to racism, what some would call reverse racism. That is why those parents are now opposing discussions about white privilege, because critical race theory and social emotional learning, please hear that again, social and emotional learning, it's in your schools, be aware, and I can even discuss that more later, has become a vehicle for indoctrination. Social emotional learning is basically your school is now a mental health clinic, and they're collecting mental health data on your kids. So if you have kids or grandkids in the school, be aware. Opponents of critical race theory argue that schools can address race and racism both in history and in the present, but it should be done in a way that's fair and doesn't denigrate students and teachers. That means that racism and racial relations are important, but CRT is not the avenue and should not be part of the school curriculum. Supporters of CRT will oftentimes say that this is not what's being taught in their schools, and I can tell you, I've had many people try to tell me this isn't what's going on in our school, this isn't what's going on. Instead, they argue that their message is different. If it's different, let's see it. If it's different, make it transparent so we can all judge it. And if it's not, then why not get behind us, the people who are exposing what's really going on, and support us? Because some of what is coming out is shocking, and I'm sure some of you have probably already seen some of that. This is a harmful and divisive ideology influenced by Marxism that moves us further away from Reverend Martin Luther King's vision of a nation that focuses on individual character, not color. It is important to speak out against this ideology that places group identity above individualism and creates two groups of individuals, the oppressor and the oppressed, in relation to race. The full Idaho legislature just passed a bill preventing critical race theory from being taught in the state's public schools and universities. This bill uses neutral language that recommits non-discrimination and calls for public education to respect the dignity of others, acknowledge the right of others to express differing opinions, and foster and defend intellectual honesty, freedom of inquiry and instruction, and freedom of speech and association. There are alternatives that should be used to unify the community instead of divide them by race. So it's important to understand that if you are going to be against something, and I've learned this, you should also have an alternative available. You should say, if you're addressing a school board, if you're addressing somebody, there are alternatives. CRT's purpose is to divide the world into white oppressors and non-white victims. The ultimate goal of the theory's proponents is to remake society so the victim class eventually displaces the oppressors and becomes the new ruling class. This viewpoint excludes innocence, individuality, and instead assigns collective guilt. Critical race theory assumes that racism is permanent and affects every aspect of our society, including political, economic, social, and religious institutions. Therefore, any expectation of societal attainment of colorblindness in which race or ethnicity does not hinder opportunities is impossible to achieve. The oppressive system must be dismantled and destroyed. This is their words, not mine.
No.
It's a mindset that impacts people in many different ways. Children are individuals and react differently. Some parents have already witnessed, and I have connected with these parents in other parts of the country, children turning on each other, friends becoming skeptical of each other because it's not about equality, it's about vengeance and payback. Critical race theory says that every dysfunctional condition in black urban communities can be traced to slavery and its aftermath. But there is also, and I wanted to bring up some other points tonight that you may not be aware of. There is also a religious component that you may not be aware of. And it comes from liberation theology. And this is where Jesus is considered a liberator. And that is different from Savior theology, where Jesus is the Savior. Liberation, and I think it's important to understand the connection. Because when you're looking at what these people are saying, and that not all people, I mean, there's a lot of different people.
No, just the ones
pushing
that
this.
matter.
You just need to, it helps to understand sometimes where these people are coming from. Liberation theology looks to save societies, but Jesus didn't focus on overthrowing the Roman Empire. James Cone is considered the father of liberation theology and comes from the Black Power movement. Mainstream Christianity believes that Jesus came to save those who are lost and to redeem sinners. His kingdom was about transforming the human heart. In liberation theology, you would have to believe that Jesus is a revolutionary and that he came to upend unjust systems of oppression. They see the embrace of critical race theory as a positive step in a quest for racial justice and reconciliation in America. But remember, there are blacks around the country who actively condemn critical race theory too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is a book called Fault Lines by Dr. Vadi Bachman Jr., pastor and dean of the African Christian University, and he directly addresses the social justice movement and how it threatens the unity of Christian believers. Bachman says that critical social justice is built on 4 cornerstones: Karl Marx's conflict theory, Antonio Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony, and Frankfurt School's critical theory, and Derek Bell's critical legal studies that I mentioned earlier. These theories, some of which go back more than 150 years, describe society as a struggle between social classes competing for finite resources. So for some, there is a religious component to all of this. If one views CRT as a religion, opponents will be challenging a worldview. You are challenging something that they see as sacred. You need to know what you're doing if you're speaking to somebody who has that thought process.
Is that a church or is it just
It's within the churches. It's within some of the Christian churches.
Christian churches?
Yeah. So Ibram X. Kendi, who pushes anti-racism, prescribes a version of racism that he believes can save humanity via liberation theology. But that includes a belief that blackness is a vehicle to salvation. That's something I'm not going to really delve into tonight, but you really probably should look at that if you're really interested.